A lot has gone down in the past day. I don't even know where to start filling you guys in. I've definitely gotten some confirmation that something weird is going on. I've filled my dad in yesterday on what my suspicions are, and he agrees that something is weird. He wanted me to find some personal information and a picture of Evan online and send it to him, so he can try and run a background check. I wasn't sure how I'd find a picture. Evan doesn't have any social media and neither does James or his sister. Evan took his wallet when he left, so I couldn't look for his driver's license or ID. Frustrated, I texted my dad Evan and James's first and last name so he had something to go by. I know that's not much, but it was all I could find at the moment. A few hours later, Evan came back with Yvette. I was surprised. Surely someone so secretive wouldn't bring a relative over. Was I looking too into this, or did Yv really want me to meet his sister? Evan's face was unreadable as he dropped his backpack onto the dining room chair. Jules, this is Yvette. We're just stopping by to get a few things and then we're going to get dinner, he mumbled, obviously focused on something else. I nodded and looked over at Yvette, smiling. Hey, nice to meet you. She smiled and waved at me. Hi, sorry to intrude. We'll just be a minute, she said cheerfully. Her voice was melodic and feminine, a stark contrast to her appearance. She was beautiful and petite, but she was dressed in such dark clothing. Her choppy hair was a blue-tinted black, and her piercing green eyes were amplified by dark eye makeup. What was most striking was her clothing. Despite it being summer in California, she was practically bundled up. Yvette wore a tight, dark-colored turtleneck, black pants, and heavy boots. She had a large winter coat slung over her arm. Why would someone be so covered up in this sweltering heat? No worries, make yourself at home, I replied, watching Evan out of the corner of my eye. He was returning from his room with a second backpack that appeared to be filled to near capacity. Without meeting my eyes, he handed it to Yvette. She slung it over her shoulder with ease, despite the fact that it looked to be 40 pounds. I wasn't going to let them slip away without getting some answers. I climbed off of the couch and marched up to Evan with a stern look on my face. You need to tell me what's going on, I said seriously. Why do you keep storming off? Evan finally met my gaze, and I could tell he was weighing whether or not to answer. He scratched the back of his head and let out a sigh. I want to, he replied after a minute, but I don't know how. He took my hand in his, gently grazing his finger over my still bandaged palm. Just tell me, I whispered, desperate to understand what was going on. I squeezed his hand in attempts to get him to trust me. A voice behind me spoke up, Evie, I want her to know. She can, Yvette began but was cut off. It's too dangerous right now, Evan replied sternly, breaking off his gaze to glare at Yvette. We need to plan more. I heard Yvette sigh behind me. Then let's go plan, she said, with a hint of desperation in her voice. Evan stared at her for a minute, before turning to me. He cupped my face in his hand and spoke gently. I promise things will make sense soon, okay? He said, looking directly into my eyes. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Love you, Dad. I frowned, disappointed. My dad wasn't able to find much? That seems like a red flag to me. I opened up the attached document to see what he found. Name: Field, James. Age: 51. Height: 5 inches 10. Hair: brown. Eyes: green. Previous residence: Norwalk, Connecticut. Name: Field, Evan. Age: 25. Height: 6 feet 0 inches. Hair: brown. Eyes: green. Previous residence: Norwalk, Connecticut. Thank you, he sighed softly, before pressing his lips to mine. I felt the warmth of his hand as he ran his fingers through my hair. All too soon, he pulled away with a smile. I'll see you soon, he whispered, and headed towards the door. I followed him as he walked into the hallway, with Yvette behind him. She turned to give me a weak smile, and it comforted me. I watched them walk down the hallway and to the stairwell, and they were gone. A few hours after they left, I noticed that I had an email waiting for me from my dad. Eager to see what he came up with, I clicked on it and began reading. Jules, this is all I could find on Evan and his dad. There wasn't a lot out there, seems odd. Try and get a picture or two for me when you can. That was essentially it. No previous address, no information on where they used to work, nothing. The information only went back a handful of years and provided very little information. There weren't even any medical records available. I sighed, frustrated. I shot my dad an email thanking him and closed my laptop. Well, now what? I thought, as I mindlessly tapped my fingers on the table. I knew my mind would wander. I decided to do what I always did when I was anxious or needed to kill time. I began to clean. I wiped down the kitchen countertops and put away clean dishes. I straightened up the living room, throwing out trash as I went. It felt nice to focus on something else, even if only for a little while. I made my way to the bathroom with a garbage bag, tipping the small trash can into the bag. As I was finishing, something stuck to the underside of the trash can caught my eye. Peeling it off, I recognized it was part of a hair dye box that had been torn off. The dye was for a deep brown, and I wondered why it was there. I glanced up at the mirror at my own reflection, noticing my naturally black hair. I knew it could only be from Evan somehow. Was he really coloring his hair? Why? I mused. I decided to tuck the scrap into a bathroom drawer, determined to talk to Evan about it when he returned. I finished up my work and headed down to the trash room. I peeked outside the window in the hallway, noticing it was dark out already. I wondered how long Evan and Yvette had been out. I had lost track of time. I disposed of the trash and headed back to the apartment. As soon as I walked in, I dropped on the couch and closed my eyes. I figured I'd wait and try to talk to Evan tonight. The sound of something being tossed onto the coffee table woke me with a start. I jolted up, blinking away sleep from my eyes. Evan was standing in front of me, and a large manila envelope lay open on the coffee table. "I'm back," he said with a smirk. He looked exhausted. I sat up and studied his face. He had bags under his eyes that I had never seen before, and his normally bright green eyes were dull and bloodshot. I pointed to the envelope. "What's that?" I asked, eager to get some answers. Evan motioned to it and I took the contents out and began sifting through them. It appeared to be a stack of legal paperwork, not exactly what I was expecting. I cocked my head and flipped to the last few pages, hoping to find a summary. That was when my eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Custody papers?" I asked, taken aback. This was one of the last things I expected Evan to share with me. I looked up, and Evan was crouched down and intensely focused on my every move. Without a beat, he said, "I figured you should know, since she'd have to live here with us. I wanted to know if it was okay with you." I thought about it for a moment, before meeting his eyes and nodding. "But why?" I questioned, wondering what provoked Evan to take legal action to get Yvette under his care. He cracked a humorless smile and shook his head, not answering me. He stood up and walked over to the couch, slumping next to me and closing his eyes. He stayed like that for a minute. I knew he wasn't going to answer me, not tonight anyway. I decided to get more information out of him. I climbed off of the couch and headed towards the bathroom, too focused on the task at hand to turn on a light. I slid open the bathroom drawer and retrieved the hair dye box scrap, in attempt to get Evan to fess up. I slipped back into the living room and sat down next to Evan. He remained unmoving, with his head tilted back and his eyes shut. For a second, I thought he had fallen asleep until he started to stir. He leaned forward and lazily opened his eyes, but they widened when he noticed the scrap in my hand. "What's that?" he asked, playing dumb. I rolled my eyes. "Well, it's not mine. This is the same color as your hair. I didn't think you were so vain," I blurted out, getting frustrated. Evan let out a chuckle, taking the scrap out of my hand and twisting it between his fingers. "I've started going gray. I felt like covering it up," he said with another laugh. I jabbed him in the side with my elbow. "I'm serious," he said, laughing. "You don't want to be seen out with your boyfriend when he has gray hair. People will think I'm some cradle robber. You freak." I laughed, jabbing him again. We both broke out into a fit of laughs, until the realization of what he said sunk in. "Wait, boyfriend?" I asked, shocked. Evan smirked and leaned in, kissing me. He carefully wound his arm around my waist and pulled me close. I was caught up in the moment, and kissed him back with a smile. "Too soon," he pulled away. "Get some sleep, Jules," he said softly. He stood up, grabbing his backpack that was discarded on the floor. I noticed the scrap was no longer in his hands. I nodded, watching him as he entered his room. He slipped inside and slowly closed the door behind him. It wasn't until after he left the room that I noticed the faint metallic scent in the air. I'm not sure what's going on with Evan and his family, but someone's trying to prevent me from finding out. I'm looking to you guys for insight, because things are getting dangerous. Let me start at the beginning. Yesterday started out normally, or normal, considering how my life has been lately. I woke up early, thinking I had a shift that morning. Groggily checking my phone, I see the text from my manager that I need to come in tomorrow instead. Great, I thought, now what am I going to do with my day? I swung my legs over the side of my bed and rubbed my eyes. I figured I would try and be productive today, and try and get some errands done. I padded my way towards the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. I eagerly slurped up the hot liquid until I felt my muscles relax and my mind coming out of its fog. Satisfied with my alertness, I carried my cup out towards the living room, grabbing my laptop off of the coffee table. I nestled down into the couch and logged into my online course. It wasn't until a few hours later that Evan emerged from his room. He was already dressed and awake, and he sat down next to me and draped his arm across the back of the couch. "Been keeping yourself busy?" he asked, glancing over my laptop screen. I was in the middle of a paper on psychological effects of neglect on children. I turned to him and smiled. "Yeah," I replied, "but I'm almost done. A friend of mine invited us out for lunch." Evan broke out into a smile. "Sounds good, I'm free today," he said. I nodded and finished up my paper. I clicked out of my Word document, my now empty desktop showing a picture of my dad and I from a camping trip last summer. I smiled, remembering the good times we always had together. Evan cocked his head to the side slightly, staring at my computer. "You and your dad, huh?" he asked. "Yeah, we went to a lake a few hours away from our house for a trip last year. My dad always knew the best camping spots," I told him, a smile still plastered on my face. "That must have been nice," he said, running his fingers through my hair. "My family never took pictures together," Evan hummed absent-mindedly. I was taken aback by his statement. Looking over at him, he simply shrugged. "Let's get ready to go out, yeah?" he said, standing up and stretching. I nodded, still pondering what Evan told me. "It was great you guys could come out with us," my friend Karen said, leaning over the table so we could hear her. The restaurant was loud and bustling, made even louder by the large group we were with. "Yeah, thanks for inviting us," I replied with a smile. I was surprised but glad Evan came with me. I realized I didn't know too many people in our group. I looked over and noticed him having a casual conversation with Karen's boyfriend. I relaxed, knowing that my wild friends didn't seem to faze him. A few minutes later, Evan turned to me and kissed my temple. "Having fun?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, thanks for coming with me," I said softly. I looked at him, noticing how relaxed and at ease he was. "Of course," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I smiled, and leaned in to kiss him. "All right everyone, picture time," my friend, Nora announced to the table. She fished her phone out of her bag and stood up, finding a good angle for her shot. I looked over in surprise at Evan, but he simply smiled and pulled me closer. Nora finally found a place to stand, which put Evan and I dead center for the photo. I tensed up, wondering how Evan would react. However, he stayed relaxed and calm, wrapping his arm around my waist. "All right, say cheese," Nora shouted over the noise of the room. We complied as she snapped several pictures in a row. Evan beamed at the camera, and I thought back to what he told me about family photos earlier. After she was done, Nora sat back down and we all resumed our conversation. Evan excused himself and went to the restroom, and I knew I had my chance. Nora was a social media butterfly, and loved to post things online. I whipped out my phone and went to her Instagram account. She already had the photos up, so I downloaded them as fast as I could. With shaky fingers, I typed out a quick email to my dad and attached the photos. I hit send, and immediately felt relief wash over me. I knew my dad would be able to find more information on Evan now. I slumped into the seat of my car, exhausted after a long shift. I worked register again, considering my hand wasn't completely healed yet. James was busy in the stockroom and my other favorite coworker called in sick, so we were swamped all day. I rubbed my shoulder and lazily checked my phone. I saw a text from my dad saying he was going to visit my aunt for a day or so. I groaned, knowing he wouldn't get to run Evan's photos through the database until he got back. I sighed and put my car in drive, heading to the store to grab a few groceries before I headed home. I was in and out of the store in 5 minutes, with a couple of bags of groceries. I fumbled for my keys to unlock my trunk, when I heard an odd, rhythmic sound. I listened to it with mild interest as I loaded up the groceries and got in the car. Even after closing the door, I could still hear the sound clearly. I looked around the parking lot, not noticing anything odd. There were a dozen or so cars still in the parking lot, but it didn't sound like it was a car alarm. A few shoppers heading to their cars noticed the sound too, tilting their heads slightly to make it out. I listened for another minute or so until it hit me. The noise wasn't just rhythmic, it was a pattern. I focused on it more and realized it was a sort of Morse code. I snatched up an envelope and a pen from my glove box, remembering what my dad taught me years ago. I listened for another minute more before I began to decode it. L-S-E-T, I scribbled, trying to understand its meaning. I looked up, trying again to find the sound's source. I noticed there were no more shoppers walking around. They either climbed into their cars or went into the store. The parking lot seemed empty, as if the sound was driving others away. I returned to decoding, and a few minutes later found my answer. I felt my head begin to spin and my vision blur as the reality of the message sunk in. It didn't last for long, because the blinding lights that flooded my back window snapped me into alertness. There was a car behind me, a big one judging on the intensity of its headlights. The sound stopped, and something in my head told me to get out of there. I put my car into drive and peeled out of my parking spot, racing towards the exit. The headlights continued to light up my cabin, and I knew someone was following me. I gunned it down the main road, doing my best to avoid other vehicles. I saw a residential street up ahead, and I turned onto it. I figured taking a different route home would confuse my pursuer and I'd lose him. I tried to stay calm as I saw the same headlights turn onto the street. They were so blindingly bright, I couldn't make out the vehicle behind them. All I could tell was it was big, and it was very obviously following. I made several more turns, somehow finding my way out of the housing complex. I heard an engine roaring behind me, and the headlights getting closer. My heart was pounding, but I sped up and turned onto another road. I found myself almost in a trance, turning down random streets at high speeds. I was so caught up in what I was doing, it took me a few minutes before I realized I had lost the vehicle. I slowed down, and took a shaky breath. Glancing around, I realized I had a general idea of where I was. Feeling relieved that I wouldn't have to pull over and look up where I was, I headed home for real. 15 minutes later, I was back in the parking lot of my apartment complex. I parked my car and cut the engine, collapsing back into my seat. I took a few minutes to calm my breathing and gathered my thoughts. I knew nobody had followed me into the parking lot, so I was able to let my guard down. After a few minutes, I slowly picked up the envelope from the passenger seat and read it again. My heart felt as if it was going to jump out of my chest. I brushed my fingers across the hastily written letters and took in a sharp breath. The words seemed to jump off of the page. I told Evan about the driver as soon as I got home. He's worried and he wants to drive me to work from now on. He got even more freaked out when I showed him what I decoded. He said we needed to pick up Yvette ASAP and they would tell me what they could. We drove over to get Yvette in Evan's car, and my jaw almost dropped when I saw her. She had slipped out the back door and she was holding her side. She looked more pale than usual, and her heavy makeup couldn't hide the bags under her eyes. She winced as she got into the backseat. Before I could ask her what's wrong, Evan gunned it and I got thrown back into my seat. I could hear Yvette taking deep breaths in the back, and I think she was crying. Looking over at Evan, he appeared furious. I knew I was finally going to get some answers tonight. Before I knew it, we were back at the apartment. Evan told me to help him, and together we grabbed Yvette out of the car. Wrapping our arms around her, the three of us shuffled up the stairs and down the hall. Evan fished for his keys while I steadied Yvette. Looking at her up close, I knew something was horribly wrong. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days, and her eyes were red from crying. Evan unlocked the door and we carried her inside, resting her on the couch. She leaned back with another wince, and Evan went to his room. He returned with his EMT-level first aid kit and kneeled down next to his sister. He motioned for me to do the same. "It's time you knew at least some of what's going on," Evan said with a grimace. I saw Yvette nod weakly, and Evan slowly lifted up her shift. I almost gagged at the sight. Yvette's skin was mangled and scarred, looking like she was mutilated with a knife or another sharp instrument. My attention was drawn elsewhere, though. She had a deep gash near her lower ribs. The metallic scent was overpowering. From the look on his face I knew Evan was struggling with it too. He remained calm, however, and began to use a damp cloth to gently wipe up the blood. Yvette gritted her teeth and let out a small whimper. "What the hell happened?" I demanded, looking at Yvette. She gave me a pained look before Evan cleared his throat. "He does this all the time," Evan replied, still focused on his sister's wound. "James?" I asked, surprised. Yvette nodded and let out another whimper. "It's been going on for years," she said with a shaky breath. I reached out sympathetically, and Yvette grabbed my hand and squeezed. I felt a mix of disgust, rage, and sadness. We sat in silence as Evan finished cleaning her wound. I helped hold Yvette up as Evan wound the gauze around her abdomen. Once that was done, Yvette tugged her shirt down and Evan began to speak. "That's why I'm trying to get custody. I can't live there anymore, so I can't take care of Yvette. It's gotten worse since I left," he said, with pain in his voice. Now it made sense why James was so eager to find Evan a place. He let out a sharp breath and continued. "He's dangerous. James does whatever he wants with us, we have to just go along with it. Now he's roped you into this, that was him tonight." I thought of the driving incident and nodded slowly. "Why does he want me involved?" I asked, confused. Yvette shrugged. "I don't know," she replied, her melodic voice filling the room. I looked over at her, noticing her color was much better than before. "Yvette, you need to stay here tonight," I said sternly. I wasn't going to let her back into that house if James was just going to carve her up again. Yvette's eyes went wide. "He'll be mad when he sees that I'm not in my room," she said fearfully. Evan shook his head and stood up. "I don't care about that tonight," he said. "Jules is right. You need to stay here." Yvette looked at him and opened her mouth, wanting to protest. His stern expression made her stop, however, and she eventually sighed. "Just for tonight," she complied. I sighed in relief, knowing she wouldn't be by herself anymore. Evan nodded and packed up his first aid kit, and I sat down next to Yvette. I tried to ask her more about tonight, but she just shook her head. "He does it a lot, Jules. Tonight was just particularly bad," she said with a sigh. I asked her if Evan used his kit on her often, and she gave me a sad smile. "Someone has to play doctor," she said dryly. Evan's knowledge of anatomy made sense now. Obviously James wouldn't bring Yvette to the hospital to get treated if he was the one causing her injuries. I felt a growing hatred brew inside me and vowed to never see James again. I already decided to call my boss in the morning and quit. There were more important things at hand now. Evan returned from his room and sat across from us, leaning forward. "I'd say you still have time to run, but that's not true," he said with a sigh. I could see the guilt and sadness in his eyes. I tried to console him. "I'm not going anywhere, we're going to solve this together," I said, looking straight at Evan. "I promise." Evan slumped down in his seat and covered his face. I tried to change the subject. "Is that why you always ask me about psychology and what abuse does to people?" I asked, but I already knew the answer. Evan looked up at me and nodded. "I don't blame you," I replied softly, thinking of how long the two of them had been suffering. I was lost in my own thoughts until Evan cleared his throat. "We have to come up with a story from Yvette to tell James tomorrow. She can't just show up unannounced, she has to have a reason for doing what she did." Evan spoke, looking towards his sister for answers. Yvette thought for a minute and spoke up. "I crashed here after pulling a late-night study session with you. Jules stayed with a friend because she was so freaked out about the driver that followed her. She never came back to the apartment tonight," she stated. I was impressed at how calculated her alibi was. This clearly wasn't the first time she had lied to James. We all agreed that this was the best story for Yvette to tell. I decided I needed to get something together for Yvette's stay. I headed towards the closet in the hallway, pulling out a spare blanket and pillows. I returned to the couch and set them down. Together, Evan and I lifted Yvette up and Evan held her while I made up the couch. It wasn't great, but it would do for the night. I heard Yvette clear her throat behind me, and I turned to face her. "Could I borrow something to wear tonight?" she asked, embarrassed. "I'm melting in all of these layers." I nodded and retrieved some pajamas from my room. After showing Yvette where the bathroom was, she was able to make her way without assistance. She returned a minute later, and I tried not to stare. The tank top and shorts she was wearing revealed that her entire body was covered in old cuts and scars. Everything aside from her face, hands, and feet were riddled with markings. She met my eyes and smiled sympathetically. "It's a lot to take in," she said, noticing my surprise. I tried to apologize, but she held a hand up. "Relax," she said with a laugh. I'd stare too. Evan walked over and gave his sister a gentle hug, carefully avoiding her fresh injury. "Get some sleep. I'll get you up at 6 inches," he said softly. I could see Yvette give Evan one last squeeze before she pulled away. "Night, Yvette," I said softly. She smiled and hugged me too. Despite her injuries, she could still move with grace. She let me go after a few seconds, and made her way towards the couch. Evie and I walked towards our rooms, giving her some space. "Thanks for not running off screaming," Evan joked, turning to me. I could see the pain in his eyes. I wondered how long he's had to care for Yvette like this. "I told you I'm not going anywhere," I said softly. He smiled and wrapped his arms around me, kissing me with passion. A few moments later, he pulled away. "I won't let him hurt you, I promise," he said quietly. We both knew he couldn't keep that promise. "I know. We'll reevaluate in the morning," I said with a yawn. We both agreed to get some sleep. I fell asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. Today has been relatively okay. Evie woke up early and took Yvette to James's place. She later texted him that he believed the story. I called my boss and quit shortly after I woke up. The rest of the day has been a sort of mental health day for Evie and I. We aren't leaving the apartment out of fear of running into James somehow. We're going to figure out a game plan tomorrow. We have to get Yvette out of that nightmare. I just don't know how we'll do it. Stay tuned for part 3 of this shocking story. You won't want to miss what happens next. If you found it engaging, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.